Hello everyone, and thank you for watching this video. This is one of the videos of Unit 1 of this e-course, and in this one I am excited to introduce you to the Circularity Compass, which is both a practical framework and a tool designed to help enhance and embed circularity in road transport systems, but particularly in public transport systems. My name is Laura Lopez, and I am the main author of the Circularity Compass, and I work as a mobility consultant and Rupre Consult. And this tool was developed as part of the work carried out by the organization Trolley Motion, which is one of the partners of the CE4C project. In the next slides, I will walk you through what the Circularity Compass is, why we developed it, why it matters, and how it can support circular approaches in public transport systems. Okay, so before we go into details, let's start with why we created the Circularity Compass. And for that, it helps to see the bigger picture, and it helps to see the European Union Circular Economy Action Plan. And this plan points out at the beginning a critical problem, that we only have one planet, by 2050 we will be consuming resources as we had three. And clearly this is not sustainable. And this is the way how industrialized nations have grown rapidly over the last decades. In the energy sector, in the industry sector, construction sector, and of course the transport sector. And that has been done following a linear economy model. That means that we take resources indiscriminately from the planet, use them for a shorter period of time, even shorter in modern times, and then we throw them away. We throw them away in landfills, or we incinerate them in plants, or we leave them as waste, polluting oceans and polluting the land. And this has turned into a triple crisis that we have today, in which we have climate change and greenhouse emissions, increasing biodiversity loss, and increasing pollution coming from different sources. So now let's look at road transport sector and how the linear economy unfolds here. And this is especially important because road transport sector represents 3/4 of the transport sector, at least in Europe. And we can see that the sector alone is a major contributor to climate change and to the emission of greenhouse emissions, the so-called tailpipe emissions. And this is 1/4 of all emissions, and of course a significant contributor of the ecological footprint. But this doesn't stop there. Energy demand of the sector is really huge. In Europe, the energy that is produced mostly from fossil fuel is being used at the moment to power vehicles, which, the major impacts that this has in the environment. Materials are another big factor. For example, around 1/4 of Europe's steel is used for car manufacturing, along with other materials such as plastics, copper, etc. And in the infrastructure sector, we see a high predominance of concrete, which is used, for example, for constructing bridges, stations, and this is a very high carbon-intensive material coming from the mining activities, but the processing activities. And one of the things that has happened in the sector is the electrification of vehicles, and although this is good to mitigate and reduce tailpipe emissions, it is not a silver bullet when it comes to this other to reducing impact from these other resources that we just mentioned. So electric vehicles can indeed reduce emissions, but the demand, for example, for manufacturing batteries, and so the demand for materials such as lithium, cobalt, and nickel, which are critical raw materials, is expected to really skyrocket in the next years. And these materials also have the main issue that they are mined and procured in very challenging social and environmental conditions outside of Europe. And recycling, which is the process that could absorb this increasing demand, is really nowhere there yet, and it is very likely that this activity could catch up with this increasing demand in the next years. For example, at the moment that we see that there are some issues already, for example, with primary steel, which is still heavily used for the manufacturing vehicles, while secondary or green steel is underutilized. And same thing happens, for example, with concrete. So recycled concrete, for example, is used in road surfaces, but it's really not reused for the construction of critical infrastructure such as stations and such. So yeah, basically it's used for lower quality products. So we can see that even with electrification, there's a lot to do in this sector to really become a net zero and fully circular. Because if we take into account the life cycle emissions on an e-vehicle, still 50 to 60% of the emissions will come from these indirect emissions coming from the manufacturing and the recycling processes that take place in the whole life cycle change. So this shows us that circularity in the road transport sector is really the next big frontier in tackling climate change and in addressing the triple crisis that we mentioned before. So one important argument that we have with the C4C project on the Circularity Compass is that we need to move the road transport sector from a linear to a circular approach. That means that we need to shift from a narrow tunnel vision that has been a lot focused on the direct emissions, the tailpipe emissions in the sector, and expand our view to what happens before and what happens after of this operational phase. That means understanding the impacts on the process in food production, in material extraction, in vehicle manufacturing, and of course, equally what happens at the end of an asset's lifespan. So how these are dismantled, how materials are recovered, and how they are reintegrated into new products. So for road transport sector to become generally sustainable and circular, we must adopt this life cycle mindset and integrate strengthen cooperation across sectors such as energy, materials, waste management, etc. And another very important argument that we have with the Circularity Compass and with the project is where to start. And we are saying, okay, one of the best ways we think to start advancing circular economy in the road transport sector is starting with public transport. And there are several reasons why. So first, public transport is already a very eco-friendly way to move people in peri-urban areas and urban areas in all over Europe. It really moves a huge amount of people every day for very little emissions and very little energy. So really very little emissions per capita. And the sector has already been quite a pioneer and innovative in other areas, other innovative areas, for example, in electrification. The deployment of e-buses, for example, in the last years has been outstanding compared to the private sector, and the electrification of trams, the deployment of trams and trolleybuses has increased in the last years. So in order to the public transport to become sustainable, you need other things, not only electrification. So we say, okay, of course, electrification, also including renewable energies as the energy to power these vehicles, but you need other things, and circular economy can really finish the job, as we call it. So circular economy can really help us address reducing waste and unnecessary use of resources through the application of circular principles in the sector, which is something that we will see in the next slides. And another important point that we see on why starting with public transport is a really great approach is the ripple effect that this could cause. Because the system is already big enough and it has a lot of impact and linkages in other sectors. So for example, it has a lot of impacts in the industry sector for car manufacturing, in the construction sector for building stations, bus stops, at different transport assets. And these lessons can be transferred, and these linkages can spark a lot of cooperation with these other sectors, and of course spark transformation in these areas as well. Okay, so if you are a transport stakeholder, maybe a public transport operator, a representative of a public transport authority, you might be wondering, okay, this sounds great, but where do we start? How can we make sense of all this circularity in public transport topic? And that's why exactly we created the Circularity Compass, which is a simple, practical orientation tool that helps stakeholders in the sector understand where circular economy, where and how circular economy can be implemented in different components of the public transport system. And basically for this, we divided the Circularity Compass in 4 pillars. So one is vehicles, which covers buses, trolleybuses, trams, and trains, essentially all these mobile assets that helps us to move passengers in the system. We also have the infrastructure, which includes everything that is fixed and it's the backbone of the operations. That is rail tracks, energy infrastructure, charging stations, depots, and buildings such as stations or even like simple bus stops. The third pillar is the energy, which refers to the fuels and power used to move vehicles and operate buildings. So this could be fossil and non-fossil fuels. And the fourth pillar is the governance, which is the enabling layer, maybe the intangible layer, which are the policies, processes, procurement rules, skills, funding mechanisms, and data needed to really underpin and support the circular practices. So together, these 4 pillars give public transport actors a clear entry point on the different dimensions where they can start implementing a circular economy in the sector. Okay, so what are the concrete components of the Circularity Compass? The Circularity Compass has 2 main components. One is the Public Transport Circular Framework, which is a conceptual guidance to start adopting a circular economy mindset and start identifying where circular economy measures can be applied across the whole public transport life cycle. So this is basically how to start thinking the systems from start to end in a different way. And the cycle is organized into 4 phases. One is the avoid phase, which is at the start and how the design of vehicles, infrastructures, and systems can be done to use minimal energy, minimal resources, and materials from the start. The second phase is the extend phase, which is about keeping things, assets, materials for as long as possible through reuse, refurbishment, and maintenance practices. The third phase is the transform phase, which happens when materials and assets cannot be used in their original form or for their original purpose and have to give them a second life. For example, recycling components or materials or repurposing of batteries for energy storage. And at the core of the cycle is the enable phase, which is the foundation, and it covers the policies, training, awareness, and monitoring needed to make circularity work in practice. So throughout the framework, you see also these bubbles, which are practical actions, and these are inspired in the R principles that you see in many circular economy literature. So the typical suspects about reuse, refuse, rethink, recycle, and recover. And this gives a bit more concrete ideas on specific actions that can be taken to start adopting life cycle measures. So really an organization can start at any phase, and this is a hands-on guide on how to do it measure by measure, step by step, or phase by phase. The second component of the Circularity Compass is the self-assessment tool. And this is a simple first entry point self-assessment survey to help organizations start reflecting on where they standing in terms of circularity, to really give them some food for thought and start inserting this circular mindset when analyzing their public transport systems. And the self-assessment followed the same circular approach that we saw in the framework. So basically, the tool guides you through your public transport system in the 4 phases that we just saw: the avoid, extend, transform, and enable. And for each component, you answer questions about your assets, the operations, and of different kinds. So, for example, in the extend phase, the questions are about maintenance, measures that you have implemented, that you plan to implement, challenges that are being faced in this implementation, And in the transform phase, it asks you about end-of-life practices, for example, how materials or assets are recycled, recovered, dismantled at this stage. So this tool really provides a quick snapshot of your circularity level of your company, your organization, and it gives you a score at the end, and it ranks it in low, medium, or high levels. And this is again more a reflecting tool and a food for thought tool that sparks conversations and sparks reflection on circularity and how your organization is approaching it. The self-assessment tool is organized in 7 survey modules, which you can see in the image here in the middle. And these are complete independent. So you can, for example, assign different modes to different team members. You can decide which ones are relevant to your organization. So, for example, if you have buses, the railway component is really not relevant for you. So this really makes it easy to get a diagnosis, and yeah, it could be a collaborative diagnosis. What is also very interesting about the self-assessment tool is that it can be really used and translated into different formats for workshop, focus groups, discussions as a starting point to start discussing, let's say, outside of the survey area where an individual is answering questions by himself or herself, and really to start together identifying opportunities and challenges, to start identifying concrete measures that you can implement in your systems. So we have used this consistently across the project for different purposes, for drafting the strategies and the action plans that the 5 transport operators that we have as part of the project had to implement, and also for conceptualizing and designing the pilots that these transport operators have implemented throughout the project. So it's really a practical tool that it can be really adapted to different settings and for different needs. Both the Circularity Compass framework and the self-assessment tool are available on the Circularity Knowledge platform that we developed as part of the project. You can see here Circularity for Public Transport.eu. Yeah, and the framework is downloadable as a PDF, and the self-assessment includes the links to all the survey modules that I showed in a previous slide. So that's the introduction or the presentation of the Circularity Compass. And I'm always very happy to exchange on circular economy, to explore on how the Circularity Compass could be of use and support your organization. So first, I wanted to thank you for watching this video, and secondly, I want to invite you to reach out to me. There is my email in this slide if you want to explore, for example, the development of workshops, focus groups on your organization to start your circularity journey. So thank you again, and yeah, happy learning with the other videos of this e-course.